Speaking of people who weren't very good at remembering our ancestors, Kemi Badenoch, who showed up late to, I believe, her constituency's D-Day remembrance service earlier on this year, and had to stand at the back as a result. In this segment, I'm going to be talking about... I'm going to be asking the question, who represents the British? And on that, I'm going to be asking some philosophical questions about the meaning of representation in the first place. Now, the idea of representation over the past 10 years has been somewhat sullied by social justice warriors who have wanted to use it as a crowbar to crowbar in their own sectarian ethnic interests into the public space, where television needs to be representing these minorities, it needs to be representing the sexuality of people in the woke coalition. But representation does have a long history that goes back to the history of representative democracy in the first place. There is a reason that we have members of parliament who are supposed to be, it's not always the case because the selective committees can just airdrop people into safe seats, but they are supposed to be representing your local community, which means that they are supposed to have shared interests, shared culture, shared language, and shared background as you. Now, of course, this all works quite well in a homogenous society, but in a multi-ethnic, multicultural society that we live in right now, we have to acknowledge, especially given that we don't know the actual numbers of illegal immigrants that are in the country, that the British people, while still making up a majority, are an increasingly small portion of this multi-ethnic society and therefore need representation on our own interests. This is why parties have begun springing up, like Reform and others, which do more explicitly present themselves as a British party, at least for British values, in the case of Reform. The Conservatives previously have presented themselves as the British Values Party. Back when they had Enoch Powell in the ranks, you could make an argument that they were the British People Party, or at least he tried to be that, but they ejected him for trying to present himself as such. So again, the question is now, who represents the British? It's not Labour, while they are headed by a British man, a pale, stale male, as Kemi Badenoch herself might say.
It was James Cleverly specifically who said it.
James Cleverly did specifically say it, but I imagine the sentiment has been repeated behind closed doors. He doesn't represent us. The first thing he did when he came in was he persecuted British people who were angry that a foreigner had killed white children. They persecuted English people, they persecuted British people who were very, very angry. And on the foreign stage, and the foreign secretary, we have David Lammy, a man who is explicitly only interested in his own ethnic background as a black man, as he said on the world stage to Russia.
Isn't it?
It was.
It makes us look ridiculous.
It does make us look ridiculous because on the world stage, Britain, have an ethnic man, not of British background, representing us, talking about his own personal interests as opposed to what Britain should be representing itself as. And again, the Conservatives, with Kemi Badenoch now in charge, are again positioning themselves as wanting to out-left the left. They want to out-progressive the progressives. And this was quite a shame because I know that you were quite supportive of Robert Jenrick, who is an Englishman who wanted to represent English values and push for things like the prevention of mass migration, stopping that, and also removing illegal immigrants from the country. Things that are in our interests.
So Jenrick had very good advisors, and given his family are Jewish, he was basically radicalized by October the 7th, and so called for the permanent expulsion of every single illegal immigrant in the country, the levying of visa sanctions and the withdrawal of foreign aid against any country who wouldn't take their foreign nationals back. He was talking about English identity, and he wanted to do a great repeal bill which would have gotten rid of the Human Rights Act, the Constitutional Reform Act, the Climate Change Act, the Equality Act, all in one fell swoop so you can fire all the civil servants. Now, whether or not he would have been allowed to do that by the Conservative Party is a moot point, because I don't trust the Conservative Party as far as I can throw them. I got my email of permanent expulsion about 2 days ago as well.
2 days ago?
It took this long for them to decide that...
I thought they'd already kicked you and Carl out of the party.
Yeah, for some reason they sat there trying to justify their own jobs. They had some sort of like tribunal on 5 tweets, which I stand behind. They're like my greatest hits. Point being, yeah, don't trust the Conservative Party. But the problem is, other than him, there was no one. And Kemi Badenoch now allows Reform to get really complacent because they don't want to criticise her because she's a black woman, and it lets them just coast along on platitudes about British values like they're David Cameron in 2010. Robert Jenrick at least lit the fire underneath Nigel Farage's arse to have made him more concrete on issues of demographic change and mass deportations. And unfortunately, Kemi Badenoch's not going to do that. And she's not going to do that because she doesn't feel that she has a particular allegiance to a particular people. Culture and law flows downstream from what a particular people in a place and a time feel about themselves and how they arbitrate the disputes within their own national community. And that national community is never questioned before mass migration dilutes and diversifies the population. Only then do you need to codify a national identity in terms of values and have a state enforce it from on high to make all of these different grievance groups play nice. And so Kemi Badenoch is basically the candidate to stage manage different diverse diasporas being constantly at each other's throats. And so now we've got an immigrant lecturing us on how the British should behave in their own country, which would be just fine if a bunch of hostile minorities hadn't have turned up and ruined it in the first place.
That's well put and touches on some things that I'll be getting on as we go along. But the question remains, why is it that the Conservative members chose to elect Kemi Badenoch? Well, I would suggest it's all explained through this single clip right here.
And isn't it great that we're the first party to have a black leader of the party? Another glass ceiling shattered. Can I welcome Kemi to the stage?
Notice how Jemrick didn't clap for that.
Yeah, I saw your screen grab of his face really up close. If only you knew how bad things really are. Yeah, that must have been quite a disappointing moment for him. And, congratulations to Kemi. That's a great position to find yourself in.
And to Michael Gove, who made her entire career.
Yes, that too. But it's about the virtue signalling. It's about the fact that the Conservative membership that is left, outside of some of the younger members who have more of an understanding of the interests of younger British people as the country changes inexorably around them, most of the boomers left in the Conservative Party just wanted to be the real progressives, because the left are the real racists. Look at us, we've broken the glass ceiling, we care about merit and meritocracy, because of course Kemi Badenoch was only chosen for meritorious reasons and nothing else. Ignore the fact that they are literally tingling with delight over the fact that she hits the Kamala Harris check boxes. Black woman.
That's so pathetic.
It really is.
Grow a spine. These supposedly grown adults, previously with some of them at least had successful careers, you'd think there'd be people that had a certain amount of backbone and could stand behind their convictions, and instead they're cowing at the possibility of being called racist when that term means nothing. Guess what? You get called racist, nothing happens to you. No, tribunal, no nothing. No one cares anymore.
I've already seen opinion pieces being presented about Kemi Badenoch because she's now the leader of the Conservatives, describing her as the black face of white supremacy, very similar to how Larry Elder has been accused of that very, very same thing.
Yeah, so Dawn Butler saying that.
You will get racist accusations no matter what. Even if the entire Conservative Party was black, they'd all be accused of being white supremacist Uncle Toms.
Well, Priti Patel had let in a record number of non-EU...
Shadow Foreign Secretary now.
Yeah.
So if she stays in that position and they manage to get in 5 years' time, then on the international stage, still not going to be an English person representing us.
No, so when she let in record numbers of Indians, for example, the Guardian still drew her as a demon. So, yeah, there's that. But this sycophancy is rooted within Westminster. So I had a off-record conversation with someone who's working in the policy department of a party, won't say which, and I just said to them, right, well, why are the politicians not capable of standing on the merits of their own arguments? Why are they not coming out and saying, yeah, we're concerned about demographic change because we're concerned about cultural change. We're concerned about illegal migration, therefore, if we are to enforce the law, we should send them all back. And he said, well, can you imagine what would happen? He'd go on the BBC and he'd get called racist, and I'd just go, well, yeah, but they're always going to call you racist. And he just said to me, well, what do you expect them to do? And I said,
stand by your principles.
Well, not just that.
Have a backbone.
You call everything racist. You call the countryside racist. You don't know what racist means. And he just went, oh yeah, good point. We hadn't thought of that. And that's the point. They hadn't thought of it. They live off of fear of how the chattering classes, who'd rather see them dead than win an election, perceive them. And that's what governs their policy. And that's what governs the reason why Kemi Badenoch is now Conservative Party.
They're more than happy to... Sorry, accidentally name-dropped you then, didn't I? They're more than happy to... overlook anti-white racism, anti-native racism, aren't they?
That's what Kemi Badenoch's done.
Yeah, when we're discriminated against for being the native population, that's fine. So, they're not even consistent in
They
their
do
own
the same thing.
pathetic principles, yeah.
Labour,
They're all
pale, male and stale. That's the exact same rhetoric that the left has always used against white men.
They're two cheeks of the same arse.
Well, Kemi's called her former school kids former university classmates who used to criticise her when she would say mildly conservative things, stupid white lefties. And then she said to David Tennant, he was a rich, privileged white male. And it's like, right, why are you using white as a pejorative consistently? Why is it second nature to you, as a minority politician, supposedly representing the indigenous population of Britain, to use their skin colour as an insult?
Would I be able to say a few bits on just political representation more generally?
Go ahead. Just one thing on that. You are right in what you've said earlier that Kemi Badenoch is being positioned as the right woman to manage multicultural Britain and encourage everybody to share in the same multicultural culture, which actually means no culture whatsoever, because if you throw it all into a big pot, what it melts down into is slop. And the other thing is completely slipped my mind, so please go ahead, Josh.
Sure. So a couple of things. The first of which is just a psychological observation about human nature, that one's genetic proximity to a person influences how favourably you treat them. This manifests in people's families, obviously. That's very obvious because you're genetically related to them. But also, if you meet someone you've never met before, you unconsciously process their face and your brain figures out how genetically proximate they are by how much they look like you, and that influences how much you like them. These are very robust studies which basically suggest that if the native people of a place want to be treated as well as possible by their rulers, then it sort of indicates that the rulers have got to come from that group. We can see it when it's abroad. That's why people admonish colonialism, because they say you don't have the interests of the native ethnic people. That's exactly the argument they make. So they understand it when applied away, just not at home.
Well, it would be mad if, in the middle of the war in Gaza at the moment, you had so-called patriotic Israelis saying, no, we need diverse and inclusive forms of Zionism. We need to remove Netanyahu and install a black woman for reasons. Okay, fine.
I'm sure there are probably crazies like that over in Israel.
There might be, but they're certainly not given a vocal national platform, particularly for the right-wing parties. And
very sensibly so.
It's like, fine, if you guys can have that standard, fine. Let Israel be run by the Jews. I also therefore want an Englishman running England. Thank you very much.
And also, sorry.
I was just going to add to your point on the face thing, that there is more empirical evidence for that being something that people do take into account. Because a few weeks ago, I covered the court case of the gentleman, I forget what his name was, the black man who was executed, and the leftists were trying to make it seem as though his case was unfair. They'd overlooked DNA evidence, yada, yada, yada. They had biased the jury by only having one or two black people in it. When if you actually looked into the case itself, you found that one of the reasons one of the potential black jurors was taken off of the jury was because he looked so similar to the man who was, to the defendant, which was one of the reasons they said, well, they look very similar to one another. He might be able to see himself in that, which might bias his judgment.
It's a perfect illustration of it, isn't it, in the wild? And I think that's sound judgment to actually do that as well. Because, no matter what the ethnicity of the person is, if you're assessing someone's case and you look similar to them, you're going to be biased. It's one of those things that is so ingrained into the human psyche that it can't really be overcome.
If I was called up for jury duty and all of a sudden I found myself sitting on the jury of like a multiple homicidal murderer who happened to somehow be my exact doppelganger, I'd expect to be taken off of the jury, because it'd be kind of difficult for me to not look at him and go, well, he's basically me sat there, even though I would of course try to be as objective as possible. But anyway, I remember the point that I was going to make a moment ago, and then we should start to move our way through the segment a bit more, which was that as well as being the manager for multicultural Britain, it's also a case where, in the same way that the magic soil means that people can come from anywhere and take on the values and therefore be as British as us, with what you're saying with, these people are white. It's always the white indicator, which is one of the things that she basically uses as an insult for people like David Tennant, who I dislike.
Yes.
I completely disagree with.
I think he's a
David
wretched
Tennant.
man.
Absolutely. But she is being positioned through the leadership as essentially a better Brit than the British themselves, which again takes the British identity, that being of a shared group of ethnicities, the Scottish, the English, the Welsh, and also some of the Irish, but they don't really like that so much, and saying that you're no longer a unique and identifiable people, you are simply a set of abstracted values that can apply to anybody and anywhere as long as they exist in the economic zone of Britain, and kind of wave a flag about every now and again. And that to me is honestly a case of ethnic erasure.
Well, Kemi Badenoch grew up in Nigeria. She was born in Britain basically via health tourism. She came over when she was about 16. But the premise of British values, according to the Conservative Party, so what you're conserving, is that Kemi Badenoch, having lived in Nigeria, because she says some banal platitudes about free markets and multicultural liberalism, is now more English than King John I, who, went against our unwritten constitutional norms and we needed Magna Carta to constrain him. But he was still an Englishman born in England to a line of English kings. If you accept that premise that Kemi Badenoch is more English, British than King John I, you've led yourself down an intellectual blind alley, which the Conservative Party has.
Yes, and if you want to see the platonic ideal of a Conservative Party member, look no further than her own husband. I think we've all seen this picture by now. That is Mr. Hamish Badenoch, where she gets her surname from. And even she looks embarrassed to be sat next to him. I'm sure this was a really elated moment for him. Oh my goodness, my wife is going to be Conservative Party leader. I'm going to be very, very happy about this. But you look pathetic. You look like you should be sat in the corner on the cook chair. And he even wrote, in this article, it quotes a letter that he wrote about her that was published in The Spectator. And I think this should show the depths of cuckoldry that the Conservative Party is willing to go to. My political ambitions ended when I was booted off the candidates list by Kemi. She was a vice chair of the party and wanted to avoid a conflict of interest, and I'm pleased she did. Being an MP is a grueling business. After Kemi won her seat in 2017, Philip May convened a meeting of the Dennis Club, which is husbands of female MPs, the literal cuckold club. Being an MP's spouse, he told us, was the best of both worlds. 10% of the pressure, 90% of the fun.
Can I note as well, for people who aren't well versed, I've covered this a few times on my show in the various episodes on the Conservative leadership and why the Tory party is not to be trusted. It's not a coincidence that it's published in The Spectator. The Spectator is basically the mouthpiece of CCHQ. Kemi's candidacy and Michael Gove's endorsement of her was fed through The Spectator. James Forsyth,
She's worked on The Spectator. Gove's worked for The Spectator as an editor, I believe.
Gove is the current editor.
Oh, he's the current editor, yes.
Yes, and he endorsed Kamala Harris as his first measure as Spectator editor, so he lost a lot of subscriptions.
I didn't.
Kemi worked as the digital director underneath James Forsyth. James Forsyth was the political editor who then went on to be Rishi Sunak's chief of staff under Downing Street. It's all a very incestuous
I believe Badenoch worked as a junior minister under Gove. Stop me if you've already mentioned that before, in one of his departments, and they've been noted for being close to one another. I think that there was a cheeky nickname given to them both called Govenoch or something like that I've read about, which suggests just how close they were with one another. So she is a creature of Michael Gove, noted patriot and positive force for the country. No, the exact opposite of those things.
He ruins everything he touches.
Yes, but so yeah, there is Hamish Badenoch, the ideal Tory man. And there were other details in the article which you can expect. We broke through the glass ceiling, boys. There's been no female Labour leaders, which is how embarrassing for them. And a Jess Phillips mention where it quotes her being envious of the fact that Tories willingly give away their power to women, which Labour doesn't seem to want to do.
Well, unless you're Liz Truss and you weren't meant to get it, and then you get cooed out by your own party.
Yeah, you need to be an establishment figure to really occupy that position, male or female. There's an interview with Gove that was done for The Spectator, unsurprisingly, where he immediately, the first thing he commends her for, being a black woman, surprise, surprise.
Well done for doing that thing you had no control over.
Yes, again, literally the same credentials as Kamala Harris when they picked her for vice president in the Democratic Party. Previous comments from Gove about Robert Jenrick state one of his weaknesses is that he looks like a typical Tory politician. White man. That's literally what he means right there. He looks English. And the English won't vote for an Englishman. Is that the logic that we're using here? And again, Preeti Patel is Shadow Foreign Secretary, so it's all the same faces. It's all the same faces who betrayed you time and time and time again. At least with Jenrick, he was making noises in the correct directions, would have been a positive force to pull reform rightward, and also has already contributed quite a lot to our cause, if only through was it the CPX report that he did about mass migration? Was that the right think tank that he did?
Centre for Policy Studies, I think, yes.
Oh, yes, CPS, yeah.
It's with Neil O'Brien, who is also now in Badenoch's shadow cabinet, because obviously the measure is to try and contain these insurgent forces within the Conservative Party by tying them up with shadow ministerial duties, but ensuring that their careers can't advance past any point that they actually want them to be.
And this is happening at a time when the shadow cabinet has been ordered not to hire political advisors yet because the Tories are in such an absolute state. They are weak. There is blood in the water. Will any party do anything to usurp them? Guess we'll see. But in total, at the most recent Conservative leadership election, 131,680 members were eligible to vote in the contest, which was a drop of 40,000 since the last leadership contest, which was in September of 2022. So in 2 years, they've lost 40,000 members, and because of that, they're in financial dire straits. They can't afford anything. And but it does seem to be popular as you're starting to get things like this come. Kemi Badenoch cuts 2 points off of Labour's lead in her first week as Tory leader. Kemi Badenoch did that. It wasn't the news about Axel Rudakabana having an Al-Qaeda training manual and ricin, and then the disastrous budget coming out dropped Labour into an even more unpopular position. No, it was Kemi Badenoch did that. But you are going to get, now that she is leader of the Tory party, I think, and it's already happening, a two-pronged, gammon-targeted propaganda attack. Based immigrant success stories, and also, let's go annoy the woke snowflakes. They're going to be throwing out the red meat. We already have some fantastic examples of this, and this is one from the Daily Mail, supposedly hard right-wing Daily Mail newspaper, which has attacked... I've never seen employed before, right? Look at this. British dream. The immigrants living the British dream. This has never existed. There has never been a British dream.
The British nightmare.
Yeah, it's not America. We're never being America. They are trying to turn us into America. There has been an American dream where traditionally, up until the 60s, people of European backgrounds could go to America from peasant backgrounds, from all sorts of different parts of the social strata, and make their way in America. Now that's been opened up to the rest of the world, but there has never been an equivalent in Britain, because Britain has always been recognised as the kingdom of the British people.
And the kingdom of cynicism about our own island. You don't hear people being too positive about living here, especially these days.
Well, certainly not these days. What is there to be positive about? But it's just propaganda, pro-immigrant propaganda. Look, she's waving a British flag. She's probably more British than white university students who hate England. Well, they might hate England, but that doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden...
Not English.
What? Yeah, not English. What,
well, it's the
French?
totalisation of politics, that politics is the only thing that matters. So if they're on your side, that's the only thing that you need to care about. And it's not.
No, and look, more Nigerians, and look, friendly Indians. Congratulations to all of these people, honestly, for actually, trying to contribute to society. But at the same time, this is propaganda, and these are not the examples. These are not the standout examples. This is not the average person.
This is the exception, not the rule.
These are the exceptions who are coming over. And this is a Daily Mail advertisement to keep foreigners pouring in, because maybe 1 in 1,000 is going to be like this gentleman and open up his own GP surgery.
But also, if you talk to someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, which is actually a case in fleeing Islamic persecution and a forced marriage and receiving asylum in the Netherlands and becoming a citizen of the US, she would never dream of having the vanity to say that because she is a student of Western civilization and a newly converted Christian, that she's therefore more British or more English or more American than Keir Starmer or Nancy Pelosi, even if they're in open revolt against the traditions of their traditional ethnic peoples, because she has the humility to know that she's a grateful recipient of a place, as if a house guest that you would consider a member of the family, in our national home. That doesn't give her veto rights to act as if she owns the home or can rearrange the furniture at her personal wish. And so those are the kinds of people I'm happy to have live here, but they're not more English than me, because without any moral valence, they weren't born here and neither were their ancestors. That's just it.
Again, it's ethnic erasure. And then there was this one, the example of the second bit, you're getting people like this, Richard Murphy, who's got hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, quite a big media name. I'd not heard of him before previously, but look, whether he understands it or not, he's playing into the dialectic that is being established here. Kemi Badenoch has made clear that she thinks that university-educated people who might challenge what she wants to do to this country are high on her list of enemies of society. Based Kemi, based Badenoch. She's gonna get the uni snowflakes. It all plays into this media narrative. And again, let's be honest, she doesn't represent us because the Times, of all publications, begins printing stories like this. To understand Badenoch, start in 1990s Nigeria. This article is literally a short history of Nigeria from the 1960s onwards, because
this is meant to be a puff piece, but it reads like a hit piece if you've got the right politics.
It certainly does, because what I want to know, if I have to understand the leader of a British political party, the oldest political party in Britain, is the history of Nigeria.
So absurd.
It's ridiculous.
I hate the situation we're in.
It's ridiculous. And then there's her history even earlier on this year of the fact that she's made some very, very big trade deals when she was Business and Trade Secretary, specifically with Nigeria.
She wanted to abolish the student and work visa limits in 2018. It was in her maiden speech in Parliament. She personally lobbied to remove those caps so we could get more Nigerians. And remember, in 2010, when she was originally running for Parliament and wasn't successful, she was running as a Nigerian candidate representing Nigerian interests on her own blog, which The Spectator reported on, but conveniently left that post out. I wonder why.
Yeah, and also people have been calling into question the basis of her citizenship in the first place, given that, as we can see here, they're saying anchor baby. I don't think that's the correct term for it.
That's an American term.
It's an American term, and anchor baby means the parents get an anchor as well. This is more that Badenoch ended up with a British passport, what she calls one of Willy Wonka's golden tickets, when her mother came to Britain to give birth. Specifically, so whether or not you want to call her an anchor baby, you can say that her mother gave birth here so that she would have options open in the future for a better life, whatever you want to call it, that meant she would automatically get given a British passport.
Disgusting.
Because until 1983, when the British Nationality Act of 1981 came into play, we had, I think it's pronounced jus soli, birthright citizenship when you get here. If you're born here, then you were automatically granted citizenship. Following the 81 Act, that changed. And now you need more to prove that you're settled, to prove that one of your parents is a British citizen, etc., etc. So it made it more difficult. Back then, though, after 1948, you could just be born here and get citizenship, which is what her mother did. She has been a bit of a crybaby about this, if I'm honest, saying that, it's nasty comments on Twitter claiming that this is what my mother did. But you've said previously, you've bragged previously, other people have bragged on your behalf previously that this is what was done. You were only a citizen of this country because of the fact that your mother took advantage of the rules to make sure that you would be.
She's called herself a first-generation immigrant.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then there's also on a more practical basis. There is also her entire career of poor time management, poor work ethic, and generally being known as lazy, which is where she earned the nickname Latenoch from. So in this Max Tempers thread here, you should follow him on Twitter if you're not already. He's an excellent poster. He just gives a load of different examples of her being late, from memoirs, and reports given by her former colleagues. So, Andrew...
I can confirm that I've spoken to someone who worked for her and said this is exactly true.
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch, according to Andrew Gibson in Ashcroft's biography Blue Ambition, would show up to meetings 45 minutes late after they were already done and glare at her colleagues when they were all leaving. She also, when she was working at the Spectator between 2015 and 2016, carried on this late behaviour. According to her colleagues, she was unbelievably crap, and said that she was inefficient and idle, struggled with organisation, loudly declaring that her tasks were top priority, my top priority, before not doing them. She would make bizarre non sequiturs in meetings, saying that the Spectator is a shop and the editorial team are the shop window, ? And advertised that she spent a lot of time on the message boards. She also, in one source's telling, would announce that there is no one more right-wing than me. It sounds like, you know, in Austin Powers when Dr. Evil is in the group and explaining the bizarre things that his father would say. I'm surprised she's not claimed that she invented the ? And there's lots of other patterns of behaviour. People have also commented on it. Tom Harwood, Kemi Badenoch shows up 21 minutes late to an 8:30 cabinet meeting. There's a lot of this sort of stuff. She seems to run on Africa time, if we're perfectly honest. There's also other things here. Here's what I was referring to earlier. Commemorative ceremony, war memorial today, D-Day, 80, absentee Tory MP Minister Kemi Badenoch arrived late and could only hide at the back and then left.
That is a very symbolic photo.
Yes. Yes, it certainly is. And again, with the government that we have right now, we do not have any sort of representation. Another tweet from Max here saying that Labour insider and former strategist John McTernan, who recently said that we need to essentially destroy small farming, said that David Lammy needs to stay Foreign Secretary because we need to increase our standing amongst the global south.
So, acknowledging that they play ethnopolitics to their own personal advantage, and so we need to stick someone very loyal to those ethnopolitics in that position to the detriment of Britain.
Yes, so I ask again, who represents the British? Because not anyone in mainstream politics that I can see.
Thanks for watching, folks. If you'd like to support us, go over to lotus.com and come and support our Christian content creators, such as Calvin Robinson, who does his Common Sense Crusade, in which he pontificates, as it were, about the fact that the church is basically not Christian anymore, and things are just going remarkably down the tubes since we left Christ. I'm not a Christian, but I do consider myself an ally. Also, go over and support us, follow us on lotuseaters_com on X, formerly Twitter, and get notified and updated of everything that we're doing. Thanks for joining us.